Can you see that okay?
No, it's not showing yet.
Okay, hold on. There we go. Now, oops. Now can you see this? Whoops.
No.
Okay, let me hit share screen again. There we go. There we go.
No. Oh, there we go. Yes, it's showing.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, very good. Okay, so let me just talk a little bit about what's going to happen today. This is the information on how you can get a hold of me. It has our website address and also our office phone number. And Lynn has my personal contact information. Here is the workshop agenda. I'm going to do a very brief land acknowledgement and then go right into the presentation. So, and FYI, behind me is my traditional button blanket that I've had over 30 years. Okay, so every community owes its existence and vitality to generations from around the world who contributed their resilience and energy to making the history that led to this moment. We recognize the people who were marginalized but refused to be non-existent. Some were brought here against their will. Some were drawn to leave their distant homes in hope of a better life. And some have lived on this land for more generations than can be counted. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across all barriers of heritage and difference. We begin this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. We want to respectfully acknowledge the Coast Salish peoples whose ancestors and descendants have stewarded this land and water since time immemorial. We pay respects to their elders, past and present. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us together here today. And please join us in uncovering such truths at any and all public events. Gunashtish. Gunashtish is a Tlingit word that means thank you. Today's workshop goals are to help understand and acknowledge the unique history and experience of Indigenous peoples, and hoping that you will become active allies and learn about your personal responsibilities. We have an exercise there near the end for today. Very briefly about the Nakanni Native Program. It's led by Native people. We recognize the deep cultural conflicts that exist between mainstream society and Native Americans, Indigenous people. And consequently, we advocate for equity and social justice so that we can enhance our lives, build our resilience, and contribute to survival of all. Nakanni is a Tlingit word for a person or an entity which serves as a go-between or connector for different people and cultures. One of the things that we do is I created this curriculum called Building Bridges Between Cultures. And it's something I offer many times throughout the year for different programs and agencies. I gave one yesterday for King County, one of the King County divisions. And it's modularized so that it can be changed and address the different issues for the different organizations. Another thing that we do is we advocate for tribal sovereignty and treaty rights, and you'll learn quite a bit of that information within today's workshop. And we also support the Tribal Canoe Journey, which unfortunately this year had to be canceled due to COVID-19. We also participate in the Healthier Here Medicaid transformation, where we provide traditional plant foods and medicines to natives and non-natives. And we procured cloth face masks from tribal people, the Makahs and the Warm Springs Reservation, and distributed those. In addition, we have a food distribution program that we just added this year. And we're also doing some rent support through the United Way of King County. Today we have our group agreements, which I'm sure you will all agree is treat each other with respect and dignity. No one is disposable, and we come from different backgrounds and abilities and identities and experiences in which we strive to honor and value all of them. We understand that there are unequal systems that currently exist. The existence of white privilege, racism, patriarchy, classism, colonization, and other forms of oppression do exist. And together, we are going to work to ensure that we're not replicating these systems we are trying to fight or undo. Everyone is capable of doing harm and being harmed. And so today we want to allow space and compassion for each other. It's okay to make mistakes, and we learn from them. And we want to be accountable to each other and meet each other where they're at. So we want to honor wherever you are. We want to be intentional today, contributing to this space and beyond. We want to be inclusive and be mindful. And those that, there's also that phrase, move up and move back. So in other words, those that tend to talk a lot, you might want to think about taking the time to think and to reflect and listen. And those who tend to move back and maybe not speak up, this is your time to speak up, especially when you do in your breakout sessions. And we want to limit the use of jargon, and I will be explaining terms as we go along, and also with your project as well. Make sure and take care of your needs. We're going to have a break today. We know that we want to have some flexibility and honor yourself and each other in this work. And of course, expect a lack of closure. Today, we're not going to solve all the world's problems that we're facing in this space. And this is just the beginning. So the conversations are ending, and we must continue. And at the bottom of your Zoom, it has your emotion, it shows your emotions. If you could either do a hand clap or a thumb, do we all agree to these group agreements? All right. Very good. So we'll move right into the cycle of systematic oppression. And if you start in the upper left-hand corner of the circle, it sounds kind of funny, a corner of a circle. We have systematic mistreatment of targeted groups. And targeted groups are often those that we call BIPOC, which is Black, Indigenous, people of color, those that might have English as a second language, maybe those that might be disabled or other abled in other ways. So there's lots of different targeted groups. There's also, if you move around the circle, there is the justification for further mistreatment. In other words, the oppressed based on the effects of having been oppressed. And then there's also institutions perpetuate and enforce the systematic cycle of oppression. Then there's internalized dominance, which is a feeling of being superior, often unconsciously, to the target group based on how you were raised, and often that's an unconscious bias. Then we have internalized oppression, which is those that are BIPOC or those that are targeted actually believe the misinformation about your own group. And the reason why that's important to realize is that by the time you're in the third grade, all the kids understand the systematic cycle of oppression. They may not be able to articulate it, but they actually act it out. And then society accepts it, approves it, legitimizes it, and normalizes the systematic cycle of oppression. And then lastly, misinformation is generated, including no information, meaning a lot of this history, or I would imagine most of this history, has not ever been included in your history books, let alone maybe even, you might not even see accurate information through films, videos, newspapers, etc. So just some definitions of systematic oppression so we all understand kind of what we're talking about. An ally is a member of an agent social group who takes a stand against social injustice directed at target groups. Allies make a commitment and effort to recognize their privilege and works in solidarity with oppressed groups in a struggle for justice. They understand that it's their responsibility to end all forms of oppression. Power is the ability to do something or act in a particular way. It's the capacity or ability to direct or influence the behavior of others or the course of events. The systematic or institutional power are ways that a dominant force, the mainstream or majority, builds oppressive policies into systems and institutions. And you'll see the history and the policy that's been happening over many, many years. I would say at least 500 years. Oppression is also prejudice plus the systematic institutional power, which with the systematic targeting or marginalization of one social group by a more powerful group for social, economic, and political benefit. The oppression can manifest through racism, classism, sexism, heterosexism. Only the dominant group can be oppressive because they're the only group that has institutional power. Racism is prejudice, discrimination directed against someone of a different race based on belief that their one's race is superior. So it's race prejudice plus systematic power equals racism. Privileges is the ism equal plus the systematic power. So it's unearned benefits bestowed upon mainstream or dominant groups at the expense of others. And then equality and equity are different. Equality is a measure of sameness, where equity is a measure for fair treatment, opportunities and outcomes across race, gender, class, and other dynamics. This distinction is important. We are told that to be fair, we must treat everyone the same or equal. However, when we recognize the legacy of institutionalized and structural racism, we understand that differing people and communities need different resources, which is equity. So in order to be equitable, we provide specific, unique resources that will support people and communities getting their basic needs met and reaching their full potential. Sameness is not always fairness if the oppressed groups remains disadvantaged.
Ellany,
Then there's
Ellany, could we get in the bigger view of the slide? People,
sure.
Yeah, thank you. People are wanting to see it.
Having a hard time seeing it? Okay.
Yeah.
Am I hitting from the beginning or from current
From
slide?
current slide, yeah.
Yeah, okay. There we go.
Great, thank you.
Now I can't see everything. Okay. So explicit is different from implicit bias. Let me get out of. Okay. There we go. Explicit is different from implicit bias, as you all know. So there's consciously accepting prejudice in the favor of or against one group compared with another, usually in a way considered to be unfair. So that's your explicit. The implicit is consciously rejecting prejudice and stereotypes and supporting anti-discrimination efforts, but also holds negative associations unconsciously, not realizing that you might have some explicit biases within us, because we've all, been taught the same thing. Race, a theory of specious classification of human beings that assigns human worth and social status using skin color and other visible characteristics for the purpose of establishing and maintaining privilege and power. Race is actually a social and political construct. It was actually invented to oppress people. Racial disparities are differences in measurable societal outcomes based on race. These disparities are rooted in unfairness and injustice and are perpetuated by policies and practices with racial bias, which is implicit or explicit. Okay, I'm having difficulty. See, I can't see my slide, so hold on.
You are at the end of that slide.
Yes, but what I'm saying is that, there we go. There we go. There we go. So we have racial equity when social, economic, and political opportunities and outcomes are not predicted based upon a person's race. Racial inequity is when a person's race can predict their social, economic, and political opportunities and outcomes. And racial justice is when you're working to eliminate racial disparities resulting from individual, institutional, and structural racism, which currently exist. And equitable outcomes for all are central to racial justice efforts. Racial microaggressions are brief, commonplace, subtle, or blatant daily verbal, behavioral, or environmental indignities, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative racial slights and insults towards people of color or BIPOC. Structural racism is the history and current reality of institutional racism across all institutions. This combines to create a system that negatively impacts communities of color. And then target groups are the societal identity groups that are disenfranchised, targeted, or exploited, or all of the above. Now, white fragility is actually a state in which even a minimum amount of racial stress becomes intolerable, triggering a range of defensive moves. And these moves include the outward display of emotions such as anger, fear, tears, and guilt, and behaviors such as argumentation, silence, and leaving the stress-inducing situation. They just get up and go. Here are some social inequities and the root causes of health inequities that actually exist today. The health inequities leads to social inequities, such as the policies of segregation, the impact of income and employment opportunities, or lack of education opportunities, housing or being houseless, lack of transportation or access to healthcare, the air quality, in other words, you know, how the environment and where the, like the LNG plants are based near the Puyallup Reservation, for example. Food access, whether it be healthy food or not healthy food, and maybe lots of liquor stores or not. Physical activity and neighborhood conditions affect health and well-being. Also criminal justice or being targeted or killed by the criminal justice system. Also access to health care, whether you have health insurance or not, whether you will be treated with respect or not. Also the social relationships and community capacity, whether or not you have those, all impact our health and social well-being. And then this is, I'll very briefly go over some basic information around the impact of COVID-19. And I use the Navajo Nation because they're the most impacted with COVID-19. And this is all interconnected, you know, with health care or our health and well-being, along with environmental and social inequities. So this gives you a map of the, and listing the cases of COVID-19 in Navajo Nation. As of August 31st, there were over 20,000 positive cases and 736 total deaths. And I might include that Indian Health Service tracks this information. However, Indian Health Service does not also count all the community-based healthcare agencies, like for example, the Seattle Indian Health Board is not included in that number. And many local cities have community-based healthcare agencies that are not included in this number. Here's some just basic information about how the pandemic is devastating and harms American Indian Alaska Native communities. It's a direct and damaging consequence of the U.S. government's failure to uphold its legal trust and treaty obligations to Indian country. Currently, the Navajo Nation has the highest infection rate in the country, greater than that of the worst hit state, which was New York. It is even greater than that of Wuhan at the height of the outbreak in China. Native people make up only around 1/10 of New Mexico's population, but more than 55% of its coronavirus cases. In Wyoming, American Indian Alaska Native people are less than 3% of the state population, but make up more than 1/3 of its cases. And this crisis and underlying conditions that tribal communities face are the result of centuries of colonial violence and neglect that continue to this day. And I'll go into more depth about that. At the root cause of all these vulnerabilities are broken promises that federal government made and the constitutional process for signing treaties to acquire our lands. The tribes ceded huge swaths of land to the United States with the formal treaty enshrined understanding that the federal government would protect the tribes as sovereign and political entities whose rights to self-governance it would safeguard and to whom it would provide adequate resources to deliver essential services. This is the foundation of the government-to-government relationship that exists between the federal government and tribal nations, which functions not as racial groups, but as sovereign political entities to whom the United States has a recognized trust and treaty responsibility embodied in the Constitution, the treaties, and the federal statutes. The structural inequities born out of the U.S. government treaty violating, trust abrogating responsibilities and policies decisions have caused the disproportionate COVID-19 crisis in Indian country today. This is evident in the immediate unmet need for test kits and equipment, as well as a bureaucratic bungling of emergency relief measures. And in order to ally the current crisis, enable tribes to recover and prevent an even more devastating recurrence, the U.S. government needs to address the systematic inequalities that have held Indian country back in its response to COVID-19, both as a matter of public safety and as one of legal and moral obligation. And then this report that I'm taking this information from, these are the 7 areas of high priority that has been identified by Indian country. So ensure the inclusion of American Indian Alaska Native people in COVID-19 data, which is actually currently not being counted. Develop executive branch infrastructure to address bureaucratic barriers, support the development and tribal economies, address the chronic underfunding of Indian health service system, support the development of Indian country's critical infrastructure, support vulnerable populations by funding tribal public safety and justice needs, and restore tribal homelands and support tribal eco-cultural resource management. So now we're going to go into the American Indian historical timeline. And this was taken from Stephen L. Pavar, an attorney. And so it's a very brief summary and attempts to highlight the changes in the way that the federal government has dealt with American Indians, Alaska Natives, and most resulting in trauma. So we start with 1492 to 1787, which describes the tribal independence initially. So peaceful relations when it suited the interests of the Europeans. There was violence between Indians and settlers increased over time. Disease was introduced by Europeans, which decimated the Indian population by 100 million. European population increased at a greater rate as we were dying. And then there began a pattern of invading Indian territory and taking possession after the Revolutionary War, and Americans began the quest for land. And this, between 1787 to 1828, that's what began the agreements between equals. Indian tribes were viewed as separate nations, and negotiations were done by treaty. Indian tribes were strong militarily and still a threat in the settlers' minds. Laws were passed to protect against the taking of Indian land, and few of the laws were actually enforced, and expansion was encouraged at the expense of Native Americans. Between 1828 to 1887 is known as the relocation of the Indians era. So the removal of the Eastern Indian tribes to the west became the dominant policy. U.S. is stronger and does not need to avoid hostility with Indian tribes, and actually they still call us hostile. The Indian Removal Act of 1830 led to treaties that forced most Eastern Indian tribes to the west. Also, the discovery of gold led to further expansion and slaughter of food source such as bison. In fact, what they did is they used black slaves to actually shoot and kill all the bison. And by 1887, 200 boarding schools were established with 14,000 Indians forcibly enrolled. And that actually continued long before 1887, because my father was sent to a boarding school back in 1920. And federal courts were authorized to prosecute Indians who committed certain crimes on the reservation, so natives were losing their rights on the own land that they were pushed onto. And then 1871, Congress passed laws that stopped additional treaties with Indian tribes. They wanted to get rid of the natives so they could take the land. And the Indian tribes were no longer seen as independent nations between that era. And between 1887 to 1934 is what's known as the allotment and assimilation era. And assimilation into white society became the new federal policy. So in 1887 was what it's called the General Allotment Act, or the Dawes Act. And it sought to extinguish tribal sovereignty, erase reservation boundaries, and force assimilation of the Native Americans, American Indians, Alaska Natives. Surplus lands sold to non-Indians. So they considered surplus lands as their own. In fact, the doctrine of discovery made it so that they thought we were heathen and were not human, and therefore, and because we were not Christian, they thought they had the right to steal all the land. The tribal culture was completely disrupted. The communal life was destroyed. Land taken away again during those eras, and outsiders were allowed to live on Indian reservations. And that is known as what they call checkerboard reservations, where there'd be one plot for a native and another plot for non-natives. Congress allowed Indian land to be leased to non-Indians. Congress controlled funds that resulted from the leases and determined when to distribute the funds. So Congress actually held the power and the money at that point. In 1924, Congress passed a law that conferred U.S. citizenship to all Indians, whether they wanted it or not. And this is a picture of a signing of the 1935 Indian Reorganization Act, which is called the IRA. This is during the 1934 to 1953 Indian Reorganization era. It's a federal Indian policy which changed as the law was enacted to protect remaining Indian land base, encourage Indian tribes to adopt constitutions, and engage in self-government. And in fact, prior to contact, all the natives, or over 100 million of us, and several more than way over 500, there are over like 1,000 different tribes, and they're all unique and different, had different languages, different cultures, different ways of being, and they all actually had their own constitutions and their own laws that they had. The IRA has been criticized as paternalistic, ethnocentric, and insufficient. In fact, it was to benefit the non-natives, it was to benefit to the Europeans only. And then between 1953 and 1968 is what they call the termination era. The IRA goals were abandoned and federal policy was changed again. So you can see this policy, you can see the evolution of how the government continues to discriminate and finding ways to take land and resources. Termination of the federal government's trust relationship with Indian tribes became the new policy with the goal of assimilation, and this was happening again. The federal benefits and support services were totally eliminated, even though they signed the treaty. So actually, every single treaty has been not followed. In 1953, the Public Law 280 gave 6 states criminal jurisdiction over Indian reservations. Again, natives losing, again, even their legal rights over their own land and territories and their own people. And in 1956, the relocation program offered job training, housing assistance to Indians who would leave the reservation for urban areas. And part of the sad part of that is that they would give them maybe $10 and a bus ticket, and that was it. So they just, can you imagine yourself going to another city with $10 in your pocket and a bus ticket, no place to go? You probably even speak a different language. You have no housing, no food, no job, etc. Many tribal governments were disbanded and reservations were actually abolished. So that's why they call that the termination era. And then 1968 to the present is what is known as tribal self-determination. And this is just a really brief timeline, so it doesn't include a lot of other laws and policies. The federal Indian policy changed to one which would promote tribal sovereignty and self-determination. Since 1968, the legislative and executive branches have attempted to provide measures which would improve social and economic life of tribes and our people. However, since the 1970s, Indian interests have lost more than 80% of the cases decided by the Supreme Court. And as you all know, there are no Native Americans who are on the Supreme Court, and there's never been a Native American president. This gives you a little bit of information about the map of Washington state tribes. This map does not include the 7 tribes that are not federally recognized. And that's a very big difference between being federally recognized and not federally recognized. And we'll go over a little bit over the treaties, which comes a couple more slides down. And the reason why I mention this is that can you imagine, actually all of Washington state, and in fact all of the United States, was at one time all Indian land. And we're actually, Seattle, for example, we're on unceded Duwamish territory, and they were actually the first signers of their treaty, but the US government decided that they were extinct and took them off. They were briefly recognized during the Clinton era. On his very last day of office, he signed an agreement stating that the Duwamish were federally recognized, but as soon as the next administration came in, they canceled that. And then this shows you a map of, and it's loading, of the 1.5 billion acres being taken from the indigenous people, and it's known as the invasion of America. And it should be running. Okay. Well, unfortunately, the map is not running. It's what the map is showing will show is all the way from the east coast all the way across to the west coast. By the time you get to the middle of the United States, is when they decide that Oklahoma is called Indian Territory. So they literally took all of the land on the East Coast and then just removed all of us, you know, through the Trail of Tears, and then took all that land as they went along. And I don't know if it'll show. Here we go. So this happened between 1776 and 1887, where the U.S. seized over 1.5 billion acres from America's indigenous people by treaty and executive order. And so here shows you the invasion, and you can see the movement of the land being taken away. Can you see that?
No, we're still seeing your slideshow. It may be that you would have to take the slideshow down in order to show the other screen on which you can see it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and that's been one of the problems with that particular
Slide. Yeah.
slide. Can you see this slide here?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so this shows you the different values of indigenous values versus European values, and it's important to show because it helps you understand what some of the disconnects are. On the left side shows you the indigenous values, and on the right side shows you the European values. So indigenous values are honoring responsibilities, where the European values are more about emphasizing rights. Focus on group and communities, an indigenous value, where European value is more about the individual. Oops, okay, hold on. Okay, hold on. Okay. Ah, okay, hold on.
No worries.
Okay. Here we go. Okay. Okay.
It's still on that slide.
Okay. Sorry about that. Let's stop this. Okay, hold on.
Where do you want it to go?
I may have to get back in. Hold on.
Okay.
Okay, here we go.
Oh dear, we seem to have lost Ellany. Yikes. I'm attempting to get our presenter back. I don't know how she disconnected, but somehow she did, which is, I'm sure, just a technology problem. So just hold on tight, everybody. I have been unable to reach Ellany. I'm thinking that she must have a broken Wi-Fi connection, right? Oh, here she is. Admit. Yay. Are you there, Ellany?
Yes, I'm back. So
Yay.
sorry about that. Yay.
We're so glad. We missed you.
Okay, so I will be, I was able to finally stop it. It wouldn't keep going. I mean, it kept
Yeah.
going. So hold
Right.
on.
Right.
So now I'm at the, thank you for your patience.
Oh, somebody kindly put some music on, so we got to listen to
Wonderful.
music while you were gone. And I think if you go up there to the, from
Okay,
the current
there
slides.
we go.
There we go. Yay.
There we go. Yay. Okay, so, and then let me close this out so I can see. There you go. So, and then you can see on the left side, we focus on all our relations, and on the Europeans, it's more about non-human as we see the non-humans as resources. And when we refer to all our relations, we think of in terms of like the salmon are our relatives. We thank them when they give their life so that we can eat and live. You know, thank the trees. The trees are alive. They're tree beings. The water is alive. Water is life. And we can't live without water, as we all know. And so we not necessarily look at them as resources. And then also we're interconnected circle of life, that everything's connected, and we need each other besides ourselves. And European value is more about, historically had been about disconnected from nature, or actually dominating over nature. We see things as being sacred of all creation. And in fact, we see ourselves as stewards of the land. And European value was about domination, cutting down trees for progress. And then part of our values are also taking only what we need and we give away. And part of that is we have potlatches. We're actually, the US government actually outlawed our potlatches. Because they saw us as heathens, they thought that we were being anti-Christian because we were giving away things. And whereas the European value is more about accumulating of wealth. And in fact, a little bit of information in Alaska, what Alaska Natives did is they moved their traditional ceremonies from the spring and summer to the winter time and told the Christians, oh, this is our Christmas. And then it was like, oh, okay, fine. And then also the indigenous values about the natural law, and the European values more about the man-made law. And then the indigenous value is about respecting elders and youth. You know, and everyone has a position in our families and in our communities. So the aunties and uncles would often do the discipline, and the elders would work directly with the youth and do the storytelling, etc. So everyone was included in raising the whole community and family together. And the European value is about being very much obsessed about youth. Now, I wanted to give you a little bit of information about the oil spills in Puget Sound, which is we all actually call the Puget Sound the Salish Sea, because as you know, Puget, he so-called discovered us, he discovered, and a lot of places here are named after Europeans. And then we are also very fortunate at the same time in that many of the place names are also named from the indigenous people. And this information, and there's quite a bit of information, I just highlighted a couple of them, of the articles and of a lot of the research that we've done. And that is that the Seattle Times reported that crews scrambled to contain the spill that happened late Friday in November of 2019, so it wasn't that long ago, at the Shell Puget Sound refinery in Anacortes near the Swinomish Reservation. And the spill was at the end of a long pier extending into the Fidalgo Bay. And that was quite devastating because, as you know, spills really destroy the ecosystem and the water toxins, as well as the when we ingest the salmon, those toxins go into our body. And salmon is a major food entity for us. And then 2013 and in 2015, the Shell Puget Sound released toxins near the Swinomish Reservation again. And they release hydrogen sulfide and other toxins through the improper operation of an industrial flare. It sickened Swinomish residents and sent a couple to the hospital. And there is evidence of plain indifference to Native people. And they were only fined $77,000 by the Washington Department of Labor and Industry. So you can see again how the systematic cycle of oppression is still continuing to operate. And so there was a similar incident flare in 2013. And these are the resources from the articles. Okay. Doesn't want to, there we go. There we go. This gives you a map of the largest oil spills affecting the US waters on the left. It's from 1969 to the present, and the present on this map is up to 2015. It does show you the a variety of spills, and it does give you, if you notice the red dot is the million gallons spilled, and that includes in the deep water and how many millions of gallons were spilled, all the way to the 0.5 milligram mgs. And this is from NOAA, National Oceanic Atmospheric Agency. And on the right shows you the Washington State Olympic National Park, Puget Sound, after one oil spill in May of 2014. And you can see the presence of oil throughout all of that area, which directly affect, the land, the water, the people, the trees, everyone that lives downstream or upstream, and see how it goes out into the ocean. And then this, I'm hoping this works, but this is the from the News Tribune. It's an article, but also it's a video. And let's move on to the next one. I wanted to share just briefly the impact, and I'm sure you're all aware of this, of how the Tacoma LNG are having major legal challenges because of what they're trying to do. So the Puyallup Tribe of Indians, as you know, and the nonprofit law firm Earth Justice filed legal challenges against the liquefied natural gas, which is also known as LNG, storage facility in Tacoma, Washington. It is the latest show of opposition to a dangerous fossil fuel project that is vehemently opposed by the tribe and the health and environmental advocates. And the tribe and Earth Justice filed separate appeals with the Washington Pollution Control Hearings Board in response to the determination by the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency on December 10th to issue an air permit for the project. And the appeal on behalf of several health and environmental organizations represented by Earth Justice pushes back on the Puget Sound, the PSCAA's determination that the climate impacts of the LNG facility would be negligible, exposing the flawed analysis of the environmental impact statement, which I actually have a copy of. It's pretty lengthy and intensive, but there's so much in there that's inaccurate. And the fossil fuel industry continues to misrepresent the dramatic impacts of the fracked gas on our climate and community safety. And then the appeal tackles the issue head on. Issuing a permit for the LNG facility is also inconsistent with the Washington's established climate goals that call for transitioning away from fossil fuels. Instead, the permit ties Tacoma to a fracked gas supply chain and continued fossil fuel consumption for over 40 years or longer. And organizations that signed on to the appeal filed by Earth Justice include Advocates for a Cleaner Tacoma, ACT, Sierra Club, Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility, Stand Earth, the legal firm, and Washington Environmental Council. And then this is a statement by the chairman of at the time, David Z. Bean of the Puyallup Tribal Council, and he says that the tribe continues to be frustrated that the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency is not considering the appropriate science and putting dangerous impacts on an already disproportionately impacted community. And even more shocking to us is that this facility would operate in a densely populated urban area, as you all know, and yet no authority has taken a serious look at the consequences of a catastrophic incident at this facility. That's not just unfair to the people who live there, it's dangerous, just like what's happening in today's environment. And here's a picture of the Earth Justice, from the Earth Justice News Press from 2019, where the Puyallup Tribe environmental groups hit the Tacoma LNG with legal challenges. And in fact, one of our board members of the Nakani Native Program also participated in that march that came all the way from Seattle all the way down to Tacoma. So we're involved. And then this is one of the slides that Lynn, I wanted to make sure that was included. This includes the Thurston County Mitigation Plan, the Climate Mitigation Action for Thurston County, Lacey, Olympia, and Tumwater. And the link goes directly to the draft from the steering committee review. And I thought it would be important to include one of the statements that climate change is already affecting our communities, impacts like hotter summers, wildfire smoke, which is happening now. And luckily, this is the first day we've had some clean, fresh air. Flooding endanger our homes and affect public health and local businesses. And Thurston County and the cities of Lacey, Olympia, and Tumwater are working with the Thurston Regional Planning Council to craft a strategic roadmap for reducing climate polluting greenhouse gases while maintaining and even improving our air quality. So I am so proud of the work that you are all doing with the Thirst and Climate Action Team. It's valuable work that you're doing and so important to continue this work that you're doing. And then this is the information that, additional information that Lynn wanted me to share, and she will be going over this at a later time, but she did some extensive research on the plan and identified 29 of the 71 items have equity implications. And then she's giving the abbreviations: B meaning buildings, T equal transportation, A is agriculture and trees. And then she wanted to share an example of B1.4. And then this is her contact information, which I'm sure you all have. Lynn, is there anything else that you'd like to say before we move on from this?
Did you want me to talk about that example for a minute?
Yeah, if you are able to, that would be fabulous.
Sure. So the plan, as was just mentioned, is divided into sections on building, transportation, agriculture, and trees. And then there are 71 items within the plan to help get to our science-based goals. And yeah, by my count, 29 of those have equity implications. And what I mean by that is, depending on how they are done, they could either improve the gap in equity that we have going on in our country and in our county, or they could make it worse. And so I'm just going to take one example as a way to sort of show you how an item in the plan can have an equity implication. I'm not necessarily focusing on this one as, you know, of particular significance. It's really just an example for people to be able to understand. So B1.4 has to do with giving landlords incentives in order to have them make energy efficiency improvements to a property that they rent. And we can see some obvious good things about that. If the properties were more energy efficient, that's certainly better for the climate, and it could bring down renters' bills. However, there's also a concern that if the landlords get this benefit through a kind of financial advantaging to them of improving their property, that increases a difference in resource that people have. And then the landlords conceivably could start charging more rent as a result of that, making the housing then unaffordable to low-income people who might have been renting that property. There are potential remedies for that, like you could say the landlords are not allowed to raise rent for a 5-year period after they get that sort of an incentive. There are probably a number of ways that problem could be solved. The point being that as we pass this plan, these 29 items will need to be thought about in a careful way so that we're not disadvantaging BIPOC people in our communities. So I'm going to turn it back to you, but that's an example of equity.
That's wonderful. I'm so glad you shared that. And that definitely, after lunch, we'll be doing a breakout session, and those are just some ways that you might want to discuss. And they received the handout, correct? So,
sorry, I was muted while I was answering your question.
Okay, no worries.
Yeah, yes, it was sent out this morning, and so people should be able to find that in their email. If for some reason you did not get it, then please email to me, Lynn at thirstandclimateaction.org, so that I can resend it to you.
Great. And I also have slides on that too. Even though they break out into groups, they may not be able to see the slides, but we can show the slides in advance if we need to, after lunch. So I have very briefly, I have 2 slides on this. And this is how to be an ally or a co-conspirator. And many of our youth love to use the co-conspirator as a positive frame as opposed to negative, because it historically had been used as more of a criminal theme. But with the today, they're seeing co-conspirator as someone who's not just saying they're an ally, but actually taking action to be an ally. So like today, participating in this workshop is like being a co-conspirator. You're actively learning and listening and engaging with each other, when we do the breakout rooms. And so how to be an ally, as you know, to respect and support Indigenous sovereignty. And after this, I'll go over some of the resources, and there's lots of resources. I've been studying this for my entire life, so I have lots and lots, I have pages and pages of resources. And then, learn about the treaties, and that'll be on another slide. Treaties are the supreme law of the land. It's also in articles and in the U.S. Constitution. And then consider future generations in all your decisions, for example, for the next 7 generations, and so that we can focus on the future in a good way with all of our children and grandchildren and so on for 7 generations into the future. An ally would question and resist stereotypes, including team names and mascots. We're hoping to end those team names and mascots today, especially given the Black Lives Matter movement, which we fully support. And then learn more and reject the doctrine of discovery. And there's actually a wonderful film on that, which is on the resource list. It was done in 2015 by an actual Native American. It's a very good film. And I've referred the film to meaningful movings. So it might be something you might want to think about doing in the future, of showing that film. And then it's highly recommended to take some time to slow down, listen more than you talk. And that's kind of what's happening with COVID-19. Part of the silver lining is, we're not polluting Mother Earth, and we're actually, in some ways, it can be good and bad. We're forced to be home, but also be with each other and, be more reflective. And then work to end global warming, which you all are, which is wonderful. Support renewable energy, which is really encouraging that you're even talking about that, which is wonderful. Stop hydrofracking, dirty coal, and uranium mining, which are very harmful, as you all know, to Mother Earth and to ourselves. And then not co-opting Native culture and ceremony. And return sacred objects. In the resource list, I do include, there's actually a public law. It's a law that, for example, museums now are required by law to return the sacred objects that they have taken. It's highly recommended that you purchase only authentic Native American art and products. And also in the resource list, I do list how to do that. There's a resource, a link to the proper way of to purchase authentic Native American arts and products. And then read and promote the UN Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples. I actually have a copy of that. It's quite extensive, and it's Indigenous, so it's for all the Indigenous peoples throughout the world. So it's a really wonderful document. And then it's highly recommended to celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day on October 12th. The Indigenous people are taking back and celebrating our way of being on October 12th this year. And we often have marches and other educational gatherings. And with the COVID-19, we'll see what happens. So much has changed as opposed to this COVID-19 epidemic. And then learn about Indigenous people's land that you're living on and working on. And then all beings, plants and animals are relatives and not resources. Appreciate the diversity of nations, cultures, and people. read Native authors, support Native crafts, people, businesses, and events. And just a little note also on the lower right-hand corner is a picture of my traditional button blanket that's over 30 years old. It's been at multiple gatherings, totem pole risings, canoe journeys, sacred ceremonies. I've taken this to Hawaii, to Alaska, you know, at California when we participated in the canoe journey with Alcatraz. And then this is the beginning of the equity resource list, and the resource list I definitely want to make sure you have copies of. I wanted to share some of the people that have been very influential in the equity movement. And back in the day, in the 80s and 90s, we used to call it diversity or diversity training. And I was involved even then in the diversity training. So I have many years of experience in doing this. So I wanted to share a little bit about Sherry R. Brown is the founder and executive director of the National Coalition Building Institute. They're in Silver Springs, Maryland. They have offices actually all over the world. So the NCBI, the I, even though it's institute, it also now represents international. They've done phenomenal work, and I've actually studied with Sherry Brown for a number of years and actually became a trainer for NCBI on undoing institutionalized racism. And then Glenn Harris, you may or may not know, he's the president of the Race Forward, which was previously known as Center for Social Inclusion, or CSI. Their main office is in New York, but they also have an office in California. He also used to be the manager of the City of Seattle's Racial and Social Justice Initiative, which is actually now a whole department. And before it was like 2 people. And there's a link there about one of Glenn's presentations. I also had the honor of working with Glenn Harris directly because I was very deeply involved with the Puget Sound cohort, which for 3 years, which started 4 years ago. And we created a racial toolkit that we're actually going to be offering a workshop for the Race Forward conference in November. So a small team of us created this racial toolkit, and we'll be giving a Zoom workshop on that in November. And then Dr. Robin DeAngelo, she's a lecturer for University of Washington School of Social Work, and she was previously served as the Director of Inclusion and Equity with Sound Generations, which was formerly known as Senior Services, and she's an author of numerous books, and she currently teaches a workshop called White Fragility. She has a great website. Her book is also called White Fragility, which many of you may have read or known or heard about. She lives in Seattle. And then in the link, I've included links to a couple of her presentations. One she gave at Shoreline Community College. And then one of her other books is called What Does It Mean to Be White? And part of the reason why I share that is she asked me to help write in chapter 15 what it's like to be a Native American, Alaska Native in America, in the US. And then other BIPOCs have also contributed to her chapter 15 in the book called What Does It Mean to Be White? And it's still available. And then I listed some nonprofits and agencies, and there are many more than this, and I'm sure there's more also in Thurston County as well. Because I live in King County, of course, I know these resources very well. King County Native American Leadership Council is fairly, it's an affinity group for King County, and Pamela Stearns is the founder and chair of, it's called NALC, N-A-L-K, Native American Leadership Council. And I gave a workshop for them yesterday. And there's also, I don't know if you're familiar with it, it's called Nonprofits for Anti-Racism Coalition, and they call it NPARC, and they have a website. And they share resources, they offer educational panel discussions, they coordinate meetings, they have a newsletter, and it's all volunteer and coordinated. All their efforts are run by volunteers. And then the city of Seattle has a racial and social justice webpage. They have a racial and social justice initiative toolkit, which is actually a link directly to the toolkit, which was finalized in 2012. So I've been involved with this for quite a number of years. And then I like the Governor's Office of Indian Affairs. It's a wonderful link because they have a huge, I one time printed out a lot of the materials. It was over 300 pages, but you can pick and choose the information. It will have live links to like all the treaties. So you can click on that and read the treaties. And then, and many other things. It'll give you a list of all the federally recognized tribes and the non-federally recognized tribes, including the maps and that kind of thing. UIHI stands for Urban Indian Health Institute, which is actually connected to the Seattle Indian Health Board, but it is, UIHI is actually nationwide. There is a Seattle chapter. And I included a download of their just one of their documents. They have tons and tons of resources on their webpage. I also include the link to the Bolt decision, which was, it's a blog, US versus Washington, 1974 to 2014, which references the 15% fishing decision from the Bolt decision. I also include the American Indian Religious Freedom Act, which is Public Law 95341 from the 95th Congress. And that's really informative link. I include an article on COVID-19, the response in Indian country, and how the federal government has really failed American Indians, Alaska Natives, Native Americans. And then also a very good article on amid, it's called Amid Coronavirus Hard Times, the U.S. government must honor its commitment to Native Americans. So it also references the treaties and the responsibilities. There's a really good article on the 11 ways white America can avoid taking responsibility for its racism. There's a really good article on 14,000-year-old village unearthed on British Columbia Islands and was actually discovered by a University of Victoria student. And that's a really good article. So I included that link. And there's also a very good mindful listening article that I included, very informative. And then there's the Indigenous Knowledge Systems in Alaskan Native Way of Knowing. Many people have asked me about our Indigenous knowledge and our ways of being. So I included that link there. And then there's a wonderful article on unsettling America, decolonization in theory and practice. It's a very good article. And then there's the white fragility article again, another very informative article. Now, the next item is the movie called Doctrine of Discovery, Unmasking the Domination Code. The director is actually Sheldon Wolfchild. The running time is 61 minutes, and the release year is 2015. And it talks about how the first settlers, the Christians, came and inhabited the land, and they considered us infidels, heathens, and savages. And so the doctrine of discovery actually is their justification of claiming all of the right of all of the land and trying to get rid of all of us very intentionally. And so that was their justification for the mere right of occupancy. And so the film is really well done, and it's done in a very honorable and respectful way. It's just mostly a lot of facts, because I truly believe that we need to be in this together, and I don't want people to feel guilty. We need you as allies. And so the more education and the forming communication and partnership is how to do that. And then I also include the Indian Arts and Crafts Act of 1990, which is Public Law 101 to 644, and that linkage with the US Congress, the bill that passed. And that directly affects advertising and prohibits misrepresentation in the marketing of Indian arts and crafts and products within the U.S. And the law covers all Indian and Indian style traditional and contemporary arts produced after 1935. And then the Seattle Board of Trustees passed an ordinance number 5 to remove all Indians from Seattle. And that was dated February 7th in 1865. So you can see they're always trying to eliminate or make us invisible. And there's the link to the history link to that resource. This gives you a list of the treaties, and it's the source is the Governor's Office of Indian Affairs. If you go on to that link that's highlighted in blue, that will take you to the treaties, of which there are 7. The Treaty of Medicine Creek of 1854, which the Duwamish is part of, the Treaty of Point Elliott of 1855, the Treaty of Point No Point of 1855, the Treaty of Nia Bay, where the Macaws live, of 1855, the Treaty with the Yakima of 1855, and please note the Yakima Nation spelled the name Yakima, Y-A-K-A-M-A. So when you add the I, that's the Anglicization of Yakima. And then Quinault Treaty of 1856, and then the treaty with Walla Walla of 1855. I just want to note that the Quinault Nation actually is having to go through extensive work today because of climate change and the global warming. Their land is actually falling into the ocean, and they're having to move their people from where they are located right on the ocean back. And there's a whole plan. It's quite extensive plan. It's about a 75-page plan showing all of the efforts in the work and how they're having to redesign their land that they have along the waterfront there. And then we're almost at break, and after the break, we'll come back and discuss the Bill of Responsibilities, and there'll be a breakout rooms for you all answering these 3 questions, which are, which of these, meaning the Bill of Responsibilities, which you have a handout, and we can also put that up again if we need to after lunch. Which of these bills of responsibilities would be the most challenging for you personally? Question number 2 is, which do you think can you implement? And you might want to give some brief details. And then in 3, where do you think you need more information and or training? And we know this is just a very broad overview with some detail. Clearly not enough. I mean, I have so much information and expertise and experience in this, I could literally give a 3-month workshop. So with that, Lynn, I give you the floor.
Okay, well, you are amazing in how close you came in to our 12 o'clock lunch break. Good job. Okay, well, this has been an amazing information-packed morning. When we come back after lunch, it'll be more interactive and experiential. As she mentioned, you'll be getting into little breakout groups with other people, and we'll be coming back for some sharing in the whole group, etc. So I hope that you will all have a really good lunch. We're going to take about, we'll also have some time for questions and answers. So whatever you were writing down as questions that you had for Ellany, we'll have time for that. Ellany, sorry. We'll have time for that after lunch. So keep hold of those questions that you got while we were going along there. I hope you have a good lunch. We'll be coming back at 1 from lunch, and if you can either leave your screen and just leave it be, or you can leave and then use the same link from the email to re-enter after lunch. And I'm going to stay on for a few minutes if people have any technical questions. I know a number of people were saying to me that they wanted this handout that was being mentioned with all the great resources on it, and I will make sure that that gets sent to everybody. It is not among the ones that got sent to you this morning, and I have resent the morning one to people twice now, earlier in the morning, and then while the workshop was going on, I resent it again. So you should definitely be able to find the handout for the afternoon in your email, but if you don't find it, please email to me, lynn@thirstonclimateaction.org, during the lunch break, so I can try to make sure that you get it. Okay. Anybody who has a specific question about logistical stuff, please unmute and ask it. If you have questions for our presenter, please hold those until this afternoon.
And then after the Q&A, then we'll go into the breakout with the Bill of Responsibilities. So I wanted to start off by letting you all know that you will be getting those resource lists. And then in the resource list, it actually has the live links. And those, are in blue. And I sent that to Lynn. And that includes the videos and all of the materials that I shared with you today. And do we have, let's see, any questions? Let's see.
So if you think back about what she shared with us this morning, what questions do you have?
Chris.
Hi. So I am a student at Evergreen State College in Olympia, and I just took on a role for doing outreach for the graduate studies programs. And one of my focuses is specifically anti-oppression work in the environmental sector. And I am trying to organize, I guess, some guest lectures, speakers, or maybe some trainings. And so, yeah, I guess I'm just interested in like trying to find out if you're like available or if we could connect, because I'm trying to really get a push at Evergreen to focus more on this sort of intersectional topics of blending anti-oppression and environmentalism, because it's obviously a very big issue, and I think this work is like really important, and I think it's really great that like you're willing to offer this education for white allies, and I would love to connect with you on that.
Yes, I'm very interested in that, Chris. In fact, that's part of the reason I'm doing this. And this is my passion to do this work. And I've done work for King County and some other agencies as well. And I do know that they do have a lot of Evergreen. I do know that they have a lot of work to do around, anti-racism, anti-oppression, and that kind of thing. And this is also how I make my living. So I try to have a discussion also about, a fair budget and that kind of thing, because that's the other thing, is that there's sort of a combination of things. As I love to do the training and give you information, but also give you resources so you can also do self-learning as well. But then also I'm willing to do like lead facilitation or a workshop or whatever, because I'm also a trained facilitator. So, and I've done that for many, many years. And I started out with the city back in the 80s and 90s doing that facilitation work. That is really critical to do that. In fact, how this all was born is that I started out doing undoing institutionalized racism through NCBI, National Coalition Building Institute, which is national, international. And the workshop was an all-day workshop. And then I also went to the trainer so that I could actually conduct the training with a team. And what was really powerful is that we would break people out into caucus groups based on, if they were BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, another person of color, female, men, etc. And also LGBTQ folks, because the way the workshop was set up so that people felt comfortable in a safe environment if they wanted to share, because of, the historical trauma that also involves, we call them two-spirit in the Indigenous way of being, two-spirit. So we want to honor, because traditionally we've also honored people who have multiple genders. So there's a tribe that actually has 5 genders. And so we want to honor all people. And so, yes, and it's so tied in. The work that I do is very tied in with currently what's happening, but that's why I like to talk about the history, because also it's been eliminated, but then show how we can be allies and how we can work together, because that's really the critical work that needs to be done. And there are some white-led organizations too, where you can actually work on your own internalized, because we were all raised, in this environment, the USer environment. So thank you. I would be very interested in, yeah. So looks like Phyllis has her hand up. So go ahead.
Address you. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm part of several environmental advocacy groups, and we're struggling with looking at our operations and our bylaws and how we work, and basically having a hard time recruiting people that could be helpful to us in that work, that could speak with authority, representatives from the tribes or underrepresented communities. And it's hard trying to develop a policy or a procedure without the key players there. And then that also translates to some of our advocacy work that we're doing locally, with county and city governments. We need representation, and that's while we're advocating for policies and all that are being considered by our elected officials. So can you comment on that?
Yes, I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because there is a very, very active, there's two organizations that I would refer you to check out their websites. One is All Indian Tribes of Northwest Indians, and they're very active, and they have committees with all of the things that you talked about. They have committees with policy committees, legal committee, environmental committee, transportation committee, health committee, education committee. I mean, they're huge, and all the Northwest tribes are linked up to this organization. I should say all the federally recognized tribes are linked up. And then the other organization is the National Congress of American Indians. Now, ATNI is Northwest focused. So that would be your first, I would check out their website and read their resolutions, their mission statement, etc. And
Did you send that to us, Lynn?
I can send that to Lynn. Yeah.
Okay.
And their website, and they in turn, ATNI also in turn links up and works directly with the National Congress of American Indians, and NCAI is their acronym, and they work nationally with all the tribes. So it's a really big job, and then they link directly with Congress. So that's our path to making change regarding policy, laws, procedures, etc. So that's that.
Okay.
Thank you so much. That's a really big question, but that's a very good question.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you for asking.
So just to,
I see.
since it was before lunch, just to remind people who might be trying to think about their questions, we went over a lot of definition of terms. We went over history of how Native people have been treated in this country. We talked a little bit about the oil struggles, briefly touched on equity issues in our plan. So if people have questions about any of those things, this is the time to ask them.
And I very specifically wanted to include how to be an ally, because that's often one of the first questions that happens, which is good. It's a good question, because that means there's interest and there's some excitement in learning how to do that. And also the books that I mentioned in the resource list is also some really good books to read. And that's just a smattering. There's so much out there, but I felt I didn't want to totally overindulge you with too much information, because there's so much out there, but also because of the way the systems are set up, like the school systems are run by majority white women, and they're the ones who actually get to pick the books out of Texas. And then that's what we learn. That's what the kids are learning, which doesn't include anything about Native Americans, maybe very little about slavery, etc. So there's a lot of history that's not included. And that's why I like to include that, because every place I've gone, most people have never heard of any of these, except for maybe people in Indian country. And even people in Indian country have it, because we've been, our people have been taken, during the boarding school era, our children were taken from the parents forcibly and then sent to what they call a Christian school or Catholic school or other kind of school. But actually it wasn't actually teaching them how to read, write, and arithmetic. It was trying to teach us they're trying to assimilate us. So, it's like concentration camps. So Tom, you had your hand raised, it looks like. Please
Hi,
share.
Ellany. Great to
Yeah,
see you again.
yeah, great to see you.
Yeah.
I recognize you. It's great. It's really been wonderful to reconnect with people throughout the years
Yes.
that I've done this. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been wonderful. Building on Phyllis's question, might you have suggestions about how to connect with Indigenous people and other people of color within our local community? Sometimes that can be a challenge, and we at TCAT have become aware of the fact that folks in those communities are, first of all, really challenged and busy just kind of surviving and running their lives. And then also, on top of that, are called upon by a number of different other community organizations who are becoming more aware to participate somehow, or to come in and provide input and advice and so forth. And so they get really stretched pretty thin as well. So I'm just curious, any suggestions you might have for how we might best connect with local Indigenous people and people of color.
Yes, I'm so glad you asked that question because I also participated this would have been, I think, maybe 3 years ago. I was part of a team that gave a similar workshop that we're doing here, but because it was pre-COVID, we got to do it in person, and it was up in Skagit County. And what we did, we gave information on how to work with tribes and that kind of thing. And one of the things that's really critical is to learn as much first about all the local tribes that are in your region. So go to their web pages, find out who's in office. And often tribes hold, what do you call it? They have a constitution, they have how they operate. They have like a chairperson, a vice chair, secretary, treasurer, etc. So they have a tribal board, and then they have which is actually often separate from the actual tribe, so that they work together. And then I'm specifically talking about tribes that actually have reservations, and some of them have casinos. So there's a couple things I wanted to talk about that. I'm glad you asked that question because you're right, they're extremely stretched because even though the genocide worked to a great deal, over 100,000 million were decimated very intentionally. There's a few of us left, so we're still here, right? So it's best to learn as much about the tribes that are around you first. Read, their declarations, and then every year or every other year, and in some tribes they do it every 3, maybe 4 years, they have elections. So the tribal chairpersons change over time. So even the governor's office for Indian Affairs, I was updating the list, this was quite some time ago, and their list was older than my list. So I contacted them right away and said, you have some really old information there, because they're so busy. And when you have a small staff, there's only so many hours in a day and so much you can do. But so learn as much you can first, coordinate amongst yourself what's the most important things or elements that you need or want or asking for. And then in addition, think about what can you do to support. For example, I'm familiar, I think you may be familiar with the Cherry Point agreements that successfully passed within Washington State with the tribes there, and with Lummi and the other tribes. And the reason why it was so successful is that organizations such as yourself partnered with the tribes and then worked with like Earth Corps and other legal entities that are out there who work directly with tribes and federal agencies. And so that's how they were able to successfully lead that policy or political efforts with Cherry Point. Same with like LNG, partnering with the Puyallups. And other tribes, they're not the only one, obviously. There's 29 federally recognized tribes in Washington state. So create, what is it you want and what is it that you are able to offer? And then build relationships. Find at least one or two, maybe attend a couple of the meetings if they're open to the public. But I would not like haphazardly, coordinate amongst the whole group who's going to be speaking, so that, like you don't have 20 different phone calls. So there's a unification or a unity within the group. And then start a relationship with, maybe go to, if they have a membership meeting, or also if they have a, the canoe journey, hopefully is going to run next year. And it takes a long time to plan and organize that. And the Puyallup tribe actually had very much involved with the canoe journey. And they have meetings every month. And then they have meetings in between. That's just one example. And so, and then they also have, marches and actions like out on the street. So you might want to attend maybe a no LNG or some other gathering, when it's safe, wearing the, the masks and the 6 feet apart and all of that. And, be observant of, who's speaking and how they speak. Are they speaking well? And then also know that no one individual can represent a particular tribe, right? Because even though I'm Tlingit, I can't speak for all the Tlingits. And then because we're community-based, and so like we make our decisions by community, by consensus, not by, we often don't make the decisions, which is completely opposite of the European way, which is by majority rule. We do it by consensus. So it's a very different way of being. And I've met several people in all my different travels, and they often ask that same question. It's very interesting. I had received a similar question with another student when I was over in Spokane giving a workshop. And one of the things that she asked is, she's a white person, but working with the tribes over in Spokane. And she said, how do I work with the tribes? And I said, well, one of the first things you got to do is you want to connect with the elders, because the elders are the speakers. They're the wisdom keepers. And historically, the women have been the managers, the directors, the leaders. But because of, the European onslaught, a lot of that changed, unfortunately. But we often are still leading, even from behind and sometimes from in front. So, and so build relationship. And then one of the things that I told her to do is you want to sit next to them, not necessarily across from them. For example, if they're doing beadwork, and don't be worried that they may not look you right in the eye, because that's part of our cultural way of being. That's what we're taught. One of the things that we're taught is not to toot our own horn and not to brag. So even in my travels, I'm learning, and I'm also listening to other elders, and I see how they behave. I see if they defer to the women. I see if they help manage and protect the children, or if they're knowledgeable of, like, for example, missing and murdered Indigenous women, that kind of thing. So I want to see how active they are. And so that's how I would, so it will take time. And over time, as you build that relationship and they see that you're authentic and you're genuine and you really want to help, and then you start building a coalition. And actually that's starting to happen with myself and the Nakani Native program. We've now partnered with the Transportation Choices Coalition. I'm now been requested by the Duwamish tribe to represent them for the, there is a fairly new, it's been around for about a year, with the city of Seattle. They have a transportation equity work group. So now I'll be on that work group starting this month, representing the Duwamish tribe. So that's a real honor, especially given that I'm not Duwamish, but I have a long relationship with Cecile, the tribal chairwoman. I've known her since 1990, and I know all of her daughters who are activists and also leading the tribe. Thank you for that for that question. I
Thank
hope
you
that's
very much.
helpful.
Yeah,
Great.
very helpful. Thank you.
Your answer sort of touched on something that I was going to make an announcement about at the end. So would it be okay if I put that in here? Okay.
Yes, please do.
Thank you. So TCAT is mindful of the fact that we are a heavily white organization, and people often ask us like, oh, why don't you, get people of color to participate? And, it's not really fair to say to BIPOC people who are busy struggling against the many oppressions they're experiencing, oh, you come join our group and, tuck into our agenda. And so what we want to do is really build relationships with BIPOC communities by much of what Ellany was just describing, reaching out, participating in things that they're already doing, and building that relationship, so we know more what struggles they're up against, and so we're present to share about things that are happening over here with climate change. And so we're very interested in connecting with some of you who might want to do some of that connecting work between TCAT and communities of color. So if that sounds to you like something like, oh yeah, that would be really interesting, or I would really like to work on that, that's really important, please drop me an email so we know who wants to work on that. And then I'll be probably convening some folks, in the weeks to come so we can talk more about how we would do that. But yeah, please send me an email if you're interested in that.
I'm so glad you mentioned that too, because along those lines, for example, you definitely want to do it just like you mentioned and like I mentioned, is instead of inviting them to be part of your group, you're going to want to go to where they are. And because what happens, unfortunately, and it's not intentional, is that if you only have one Black, one Native American, one Asian, then that's easy to tokenize, right? And that one person can't speak for the entire race, right? And in Indian country, actually, we say that each group is actually their own entity, right? So they're all all tribes and that kind of thing. And then the other thing is that traditionally in our culture is that when we make decisions, we have a talking circle. So you sit in a circle and you have like a feather or a stone, and the person who holds the feather or stone is the speaker, and that's their role. And then while that person is speaking, everyone else in the circles, their role is to do the listening, because that's their job, is to listen. And then in my culture, we pass it from the first speaker, and we go from left to right. So we go clockwise. There are some tribes who do counterclockwise, and you'll see that even like at powwow gatherings, there'll be some people dancing clockwise and others dancing counterclockwise. And it's just part of the culture and the beliefs, and depends on where they're physically located, etc. So, and then also, if whatever questions I can't answer, I hope that the resource list is helpful. And I really encourage you to do as much learning on your own as possible too, so that you don't want to hold all the people responsible, all the BIPOCs responsible for your teaching. So you want to do your own learning as well. And I really encourage you to learn about your personal culture. If you're Swedish or Italian or whatever your background is, you have so you can come with this wonderful sense of knowing of who you are. And just remember, a lot of Native people have been physically, emotionally, spiritually pulled and torn from their own. So there may be some who are adopted who know nothing about their own culture. And that's been part of the policies, and that's been part of the unfortunate systems that we're living under. So, and there may be some humbleness connected to that. And a lot of us, it was against the law for us to speak our language. So many of us cannot speak our language. So just like you probably, if you're, let's say you're born and raised here, but you have people in Ireland, but you've never been there and you don't speak Irish, right? Or whatever their language they speak. So we wouldn't expect you to speak for the whole country, right? So that, and I know I'm preaching to the choir, right? But it's just ways of, of being. It can be very, very different. So different ways of thinking and being.
Well, thank you for taking questions. I think this is the time you wanted to switch to putting people in breakout rooms. So if you want to explain to them what's going to happen and then just tell me when to hit the
Yes.
button.
Yes. And then the Ally Bill of Responsibilities.
May I ask a question?
Yes, go ahead. Yes, go ahead.
I was reading the information you have here, and it says allies cannot perceive all the larger oppressive power structures as clearly as members of the oppressed group can. I was hoping that maybe the group, before going to breakout groups, the participants listening would benefit from a further explanation.
Yes. What that's saying is that, let me find an example. That's a really good question. For example, if you've, let's say you've.
I'm not trying to put you on the spot here.
Yeah.
If you want to think
There's-
about it, email people that.
Well,
I think people
actually,
would
I can
appreciate.
answer it, but I can answer it,
Okay,
David,
I
because
wasn't trying to pressure you into
Right.
a hurry.
Yeah, no, because the reason why I'm struggling a little bit is I have so many examples I could give. I'm trying to find one. One example is, let's say you weren't born or raised on a reservation, right? So you wouldn't know what the experience is. You wouldn't know, how they live. And Navajo Nation, actually, the real name is Dene, D-I-N-E, Dene. And so many of them don't have any running water. They don't have electricity. They can't, wash their hands. And that's part of the reason why they have so much COVID-19 and dying. And then there are people actually living near or even on the reservation who are non-native, who really don't like Native Americans. And so they might intentionally actually they want them to get sick. So I don't know if any of you have heard in the news where people who know that they are COVID-19 positive, actually spitting on people in the store, for example. And then also, that the police are intentionally, shooting the backs of Black men, for example, because they're seen as dangerous. So unless you've actually been that person or have that skin color or have that religion, like if you're Jewish, where, your religion has been attacked, it's hard for, and often people who haven't had that experience might be in a circle and say, well, I know how to solve that problem, but they don't have that lived experience. And so that's basically what it's saying is, if you don't have that lived experience, to take the time to listen and take the time to learn. And that's a wonderful question. Thank you so much for asking that, David. I hope that answers the question. So.
Thank you.
Yes. And so the Ally Bill of Responsibilities are actually a set of 16 listed. And this was created by Dr. Lynn Gull. She's Algonquin, Assiniboine Sioux, and I have permission to share this with you. And then the 3 questions which we want you to respond to, you will have a good half hour in your small groups that Lynn's going to create small groups for you. And what we like for you to do is to pick someone, each of you, I want you to speak and pick someone maybe who would be willing to take notes. And then maybe a separate person or the same person, depends on, how you want to form your small groups, to who would be willing to speak out afterwards when we come back together. Now, you're not pressured to speak out, but we would love for you to reconnect again back together. And we'll do it sort of what they call popcorn style. So anyone who wants to speak out, go ahead and speak out first, second, third. So it's not like a specific organized way that will have people respond. And the questions are, which of these being the Bill of Responsibilities, which of these would be the most challenging personally? Which do you think you can implement and give brief details, maybe a very short story? And number 3 is, where do you think you need more information and or training? And we know this is just a basic overview with some detail, but it's still very broad. But that's why the resources are there. And so those are the questions that we're looking for while you're reviewing and speaking together about the Bill of Responsibilities. Are there any questions about that so far?
And I just want to clarify that she's speaking now about the handout that I've emailed to all of you. So it gives you that list, and then also the 3 questions that she just said. So in a minute, when I hit send, it will send you to the breakout rooms, but what you will first experience a pop-up on your screen that says something like accept invite to room 2 or whatever room you're assigned. And you do have to click that or you won't wind up in your room. And then at the end of our allotted time, I will abolish the rooms and then we'll all be back together again. You also have a leave button, so you can leave the room if for some reason you feel like you need to leave the room. Do people have questions for either Ellany or me about how this next part is going to work? Okay, should I go ahead and hit the create button? All
yes, right. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Okay, I think it has left you and I out of there, but I don't know about Will and Liz here. Will and Liz, can you speak to me? Were you needing to be in a room? Oh, don't know what the case is here about Will and Liz. Oh, they didn't join their room. That's what the problem is.
Okay. Do you want to? Can you assign them a room?
Well, they are assigned a room, but they didn't hit their button saying that it would join.
Oh,
them.
so you can't resend? Can you resend?
They will have to hit their button. I'm thinking.
Oh, there.
There you go. It must have heard me explain it.
Oh, so good. Oh, thank you so much. This has really been a pleasure working with you, Lynn. I really enjoy your work and your team. It's awesome work that you're doing. I'm just so proud of you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I appreciate the work that you're doing. It's so important that there's people. I mean, I know that when people of color do this, people say stupid things to them all the time.
So I don't mean to.
I know they don't, but I just appreciate, that you are being willing to, put up with the hard parts in order to make the impact,
Yeah. And that's often what we have to do is do education, deal with the hard conversations so that we can move beyond that. But it's a work in progress and we're always learning. So, right? Yeah. And they asked really good questions. And I remember Tom. Now, I think I remember him from one of the workshops I gave down in the South End.
Here, you mean?
Not there personally, but there was another meeting. What was the name of that group? It was a Quaker group.
Oh,
And Lacey or Thurston.
well, we have a group here in Olympia called Learning Right Relations. And it meets in the Unitarian Church, and you did come and speak to that, and that's where I met you, and
Yes.
Tom was at that meeting. Yeah.
Yes, I remember that. And that's where I remember you from too. That's right. Yes. And thanks for jogging, because I've done many, 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 many workshops
Yeah.
and all over the place. So yeah.
The funny thing is, I actually know all of the Nakani staff, and I know you're the last one I met. So, I am Quaker, so of course I know Jonathan for forever. But.
And I just love him. He's been so wonderful to work with, and he's on vacation right now. So, yeah, so usually I have him running my my Zooms, and so I'm still learning. Yeah, yeah. So, and then I have I don't know if you know, but when you set up Zoom, you can actually set up your background picture like I have.
Yes.
And that when I Jonathan did it before, and then Jeff did it one time, and he put this up in his background. The 3 questions.
It's that's
so you take a picture, or and then you add it to your background.
Right. That's a very clever way to do that.
Yeah. Or you can put it in your foreground, like my foreground. I put my picture, so that when I'm not on screen, I'm not worried about because about Zoom fatigue.
Yeah.
Yeah, because on Thursday I had Zoom meetings from 9 until 7. I was so tired by the end of the day, Anyway, so you look like you're about ready to say something.
Oh, I relate with your fatigue. I feel like I've been in so many Zoom meetings now that I am getting like sick of Zoom.
Yeah, right. It's so funny because soon after the Zoom exploded, right? And then I can remember this one other lady and I, we were organizing one, there were 2 different workshops I was running for King County. King County is huge, by the way.
Yeah.
So there was one for King County for DNRP, the Department of Natural Resources, and she was on that planning committee. So we were, coordinating with that. And at one point she said, "Are we Zooming or are we calling?" And I said, I think we should just call each other. What a concept, right? So
I have friends who have been Zooming so much now that they're like, I refuse to Zoom with you. We have to talk on the phone and stuff.
Let's just call or text or whatever.
I sort of get, but for my friends who are far away, I really feel like it's really nice to get with people. Yeah. That's
kind of the silver lining with the COVID-19 is because we can't meet in person, which we all miss, but it's still, in some ways, it's been nice, especially with those we haven't seen for quite some time that are far away. And it's helping us reconnect with people that we often don't have time to. So I'll pick up my phone, and say, "Hey, what are you up to? I know you're probably busy doing a Zoom meeting, but I just want to let you know I miss you. And because I couldn't fly to Alaska this year for our big celebration we were having, that we always have in June, every other year in June, and so we couldn't get together, and I was going to spend some time with her, and she works for Tlingit Nahida, and so we were so bummed. But then in the meantime, we're trying to reconnect in other ways.
It's interesting because there's been some silver linings, and then there's been real losses, right? It's like in the silver lining category, two of the people on this thing are grandparents, and they say, we never get to see our grandchildren normally, but now they're Zooming with us, right?
Yeah.
And so they're saying like, oh, that's really a great opportunity. And for me, my church has been meeting online, right? And it suddenly occurred to me, all the Quaker meetings around the country are doing this. And so I went back to the one that I grew up in my childhood.
Yeah.
I hadn't been there for like 25 years or something, right? And there were some elders of mine who I hadn't gotten to see, who I actually thought were dead probably.
Oh,
And it was really amazing and wonderful to see them, right?
yeah.
So I've been hearing a lot of people talking about having these kind of reunion experiences that, you know, before, I mean, it was weird because Zoom has existed for a long time, but if you would ask people before, oh, let's have a family reunion on Zoom, people would be like, no, 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 we don't want to do that, you know. And now they're doing it and they're saying like, oh, this is wonderful.
Yeah.
But then on the other side of that, like you were talking about gatherings. I mean, things that are gatherings where there's all that one-on-one little conversations and stuff. Zoom can't. I mean, no.
And you used to be able to hug people.
Yes, yes, and the no hugging, yeah.
You know, and then the taking pictures with each other, you know.
Yeah.
You know, also in Indian country, it reminded me, I'm on several native, what do you call them, Facebook groups, and we tease each other. We send each other like memes and you know, to kind of, because that's how we help survive with each other, is having laughter, right? So, and one of the ones that said, it was really cute. It said, it's a meme that says, you say goodbye and then you're still there a half hour later because you're still chatting. And it's hard to get away because you're so, you know.
Oh, I know. I actually kind of hate the end of things like that because it feels just, it's a little bit quicksand or something, you know?
Yes. It's like, oh, I don't really want to leave this group, but we have other things to do or whatever, you know.
Right, right.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you're
Now,
talking about
which church do you go to?
I'm Quaker, and so down here we have Olympia Friends meeting.
Oh, that's wonderful. I didn't mean to cut you off, but yeah, that's wonderful. And did you remember? I'm pretty sure that was that workshop I was giving, because they're similar, because they're often in churches, which is fine, but sometimes I get the churches. Let's say, was that the one in Spokane?
Yeah, of course.
The one in Olympia. And I'm pretty sure that was the Unitarian Church, where there was a gentleman in all the way in the back. I can't remember his name. It's a white gentleman with glasses, with a blue vest, and he started to take some issue with some of the white privilege. And I can't remember, but I really tried to explain why it was I was sharing the way I was sharing and the information I was sharing that was really historical, but still operates today. And then he got a little defensive and said, well, I know that's happening. You know, it doesn't take a you know, what's that expression?
Rocket scientist.
A rocket scientist. And so it's like, okay, so I can see where he's at. And you can usually see where people are by how they express themselves.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I don't remember him. You must have done such a good job that it didn't, you know, I've been at many, like, oh, the same group had a speaker. She lives in Seattle and she teaches for one of the universities, but she's native from, I think, Alaska somewhere. Anyway, she was doing this very nice job, very good training. And, you know, this is that group is made up of people who are trying to be allies to natives, right? So you would expect some level of thoughtfulness. And this one guy just started giving her a hard time, and I just felt so frustrated. I just wanted to, you know, just tell him off. But she was doing a fairly good job of fending him off. But I always feel like, you know, in this setting, I actually have a role, and if somebody was giving you a hard time, I would feel like I could say something. But you know, somebody else was in charge of that. I didn't feel like
right.
I was supposed to appoint myself to interrupt that. But I just felt like, yeah, she's doing an okay job of fending him off, but she shouldn't have to. Like I wanted the white group leader to intervene and say, you know, this is not appropriate.
And you know, I'm so glad you said that, because that was part of our training with the NCBI, National Coalition Building Institute, with Sherry Brown, and we would work together as a team. And so as trainers, so I'd be the only Native trainer, there'd be a Black trainer and an Asian trainer and a white trainer. So there'd be 4 of us, not always, but we would try. Yeah. And we always knew that we would get attacked, even if it was like that Seattle Nice,
Yeah. Mhm.
you know. And so we would pre-prepare, and then during breaks we would connect with each other. And I got to work directly with Robin DeAngelo because that's where I met Robin, is through
Oh,
NCBI.
wow, wow. So you've
Yeah,
met
that's
all the,
long time ago.
yeah, you've met all the big name people.
Yeah, Sherry,
Yeah,
Robin,
yeah, yeah,
Glenn Harris. Yeah.
yeah.
And well, you know, when you work in this field for so long, even if you're not paid for it, and that was the other thing, I hope I tried to do it gently. I tried to say, make sure that you know, you have some funding to do this, because you don't
Yeah.
want, you know, everybody else is getting paid, you know, except for the BIPOC people who really need the money.
Right, right.
We're the ones who don't own the homes, right? Because we've been not allowed to, you know,
Yeah.
we've been pushed out of the city, or, you know, because of redlining. I mean, there's so many topics I
And,
could talk on.
and actually, you know, because we made this free for everyone, maybe they don't realize you're getting paid, but you are definitely getting paid. And
Yes. Oh, yes.
which,
Yes. Yes.
speaking of which, so our accountant, in order to, you know, release the check to you, needs me to get a bill from you.
Yes.
And
I will send you an invoice.
yeah,
And then
it's
I
very
can do a
simple.
real simple,
Yeah, real simple.
very simple invoice. Yeah.
It
Yeah.
doesn't need to be complicated at all. It just needs
Right.
to say your name, who you want the check made out to, if you or
Right.
Nakani, and
Right.
then the amount of it,
Right.
and today's date that it was for this
Right.
seminar. That's
And then
all.
do you have an address for the TCAT team that I should, you know, on my invoice, I usually have an address to and from.
Oh, yeah, I mean, our address is a post office box. I can look that up for you, or I think if you leave that part blank, it's fine. I don't,
Okay. Okay. I can just put your name. I think I have, because on your website, I could put your PO box in Olympia. I got it.
yeah, there you go. There you
Okay.
go. Yeah,
So the PO box 13324 Olympia 98508.
yeah, yeah.
So I'll put that there.
Okay.
Yeah. And then and I'll put it, and it will be to the Thurston and Climate Action Team.
Mhm.
Okay. Great.
And
And then
as soon as I get it, I will send it on to the accountant. I would love to say, oh, and you'll get it in a few days, but honestly, these people are remarkably slow. I'm always
yes.
impressed how long it takes for them to pay people.
Yes.
I-
Yes. And then who is your because we have a separate that we do, but our treasurer is Jonathan.
Oh,
So he's on it, right?
well,
And then
very
he
good.
has, they have a oh, I can't, I'm trying to think of the name of them. There is you know, a agency that called Gusto. Gusto does our payroll.
Oh,
You know what I mean? They cut the checks.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we just have some local accountant that
Okay.
does it for us. It goes through our
Okay.
treasurer to the local accountant, so.
Okay.
I will,
And then how much time should I give them? 10 days, 2 weeks?
if you don't hear by 2 weeks, please let me know, and then I'll start pestering them again. I think they should pay you by 2 weeks. In my mind, that's.
So I'll put that usually on my you know, 10 days,
Oh, yeah,
you know,
that's
15
good.
days, like that, you know.
Yeah, that's good. That
Yeah.
might help give them a little nudge. Yeah.
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 I'm going to send a message to people that says they have 5 minutes left.
Okay. And I hope that, you know, I really hope that this is really I hope they're finding it informative.
I hope so too. All the groups had 3 people except for the one that you would have been in that, you know, it didn't.
Right. And that's okay.
And
That's okay. Because that gives them more time to talk. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was just sort of trying to look at, you know, how they broke out in terms of who wound up with whom.
Oh, yeah.
In terms of age and gender and stuff like that.
Is it very helpful? Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. So the room 1 has 3 women in it, 2 of whom already know each other. Room 2 has an older man, an older woman, and that young evergreen student in it.
Oh, good. Good.
And room 3 has 2 men and a woman. Room 4 has 2 men and our only person of color who's our Hispanic staff person. So I'm really hoping that it's okay in that room for her. And then room 5 has a young man and 2 women. A young man and a young woman and an older woman.
Oh,
And then room 6 had it was 2 people, a man and a woman. And then room 7 has, I don't know if the one that said they were a couple really was 2 people or if it was only one, but
yeah.
the supposed couple and then a man and a woman. So I think they broke up pretty
Yeah.
diversely.
So we had 7 breakout rooms.
Yeah, we had 7 breakout rooms. Yeah.
Good. That's good. That's good because then that gives us time. Yeah, that's going to give us a whole half, which is great because then that hopefully depending and given how the Q&A went, if they're as efficient and as during the Q&A and, pretty, specific, then I think it should go very well. Because some of the workshops I've given, there's usually one who likes to do dissertations.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, have you noticed that sometimes people are reluctant to report? I've been in little subgroups where, like, usually a white man, kind of ruined the group for everybody, by mansplaining everything to everybody.
Yeah, they take up all the airtime.
Yeah. And so then, like, when it comes to report backs, I just feel like, well, I have nothing to report because so-and-so here had
Mr. So-and-so did all the talking. Yeah.
exactly.
That's part of the reason why I talked about the speak up and step up and step back is I hope that that's remembered.
Yes, well, I hope so
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
I imagine some people have a great experience in their breakout room and probably somebody doesn't.
And as a trained facilitator, this has happened so many times and I just can't help but I start facilitating. So then I say to the white man usually what it is, and I try to be as, as professional as possible and say something like, thank you so much for your opportunity. Let's get some people who haven't had an opportunity to speak.
Right.
And and then I might look at maybe even a POC person and say, is there anything you'd like to say or you'd like to say? And I try to get them to speak. Or if maybe it's another woman, I might say, is there something you'd like to say?
Yeah.
And then if not, if not, that's okay. We just want to make sure other people who haven't had a chance to speak say something. So it doesn't sound like we're blaming them.
Right. Yes, I have tried that on a number of occasions. Sometimes they gracefully then let go of the microphone, and other times they're still.
Yeah. I was in a circle once that was really, really contentious.
Yeah.
And it was a white man and a white female, and boy, they ganged up on me, and I stood my ground.
Yeah.
And everybody in the circle they were so afraid to speak after that. And so I reported it. I told Myra what happened, and I said, they really took their white privilege on me. And I was the only Native at the table. And there's only 5 Natives in this entire room of about 100 people. See, so the genocide worked fairly well, but even though there's a smattering of us, and actually the new numbers were supposed to be about 1.7 million of us. So there's almost 2% of the population. So it didn't completely work, but
I know. When I went to the Smithsonian, the Native American Museum at the Smithsonian, which frankly they should call the Museum of Genocide, because really, but there's that one, there's a wall that has a chart on it, and it has this picture where it shows the Native American population, and then the U.S., the white population, and it's just, oh my God.
And it was very intentional.
I mean, that graphic though is very, it really tells you,
I would love to find that graphic and put that in my slide.
Let me look.
If you can find it. Yeah, that'd be great.
I took a picture of it when I was there. I'll have to see it. If
maybe a picture, because I'd even be willing to say, photo, because what I always like to give the resource where it's found, because a couple times in the very, very beginning, they would question me,
Oh,
like, oh, like there's no racism or there's no white privilege.
yeah.
And then that's why I like to wait to the end, because if you notice, by the time I'm done, they can't deny that there's racism. They can't deny that there's been racist policies. They can't, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I try not to hammer it, but it's more, I try to do it more of as an education
Yeah.
way of being, you know.
We're right at,
Okay.
I need to bring them back. I want to tell you, I will have one announcement at the end. So
Good. Let's do that.
right there.
Great.
All right. So the close there, giving them a few seconds and then they're coming back. And I see a couple people have already popped back. Hi, Connie. Hi, Chris. Yeah, there are more ones ending. Okay, good. Got 30 seconds left on some of them. Okay. Well, it's sort of nice that people are coming back with their faces showing. Okay, we still have 19 seconds before all of the breakout rooms end. 11 seconds. Okay. 3, 2, 1. Okay, they should be all closed. Yep.
Yay. Welcome back.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Very good. I'm so glad. I hope that you found that the breakout rooms were of benefit to communicate with another 1 or 2 people. I'm so glad that you were welcome back to the group, and please feel free to have someone start with item number 1. Which of these would be the most challenging personally for you of the bill of responsibilities? Feel free to join and speak up. Maybe Sabine, maybe you might want to speak up.
And Lonnie, are you wanting people to share only what they said or what other people in their group?
Whatever you're most comfortable doing. You might feel free to speak for yourself, or if you're the speaker for the group, that's okay too, or maybe a little bit of both. Okay, thank you, Sabine.
Sure, absolutely. I was in a break room with Phyllis and Barbara, you know, we did decide that I might be a speaker for the group, but of course, if you have more to supplement of what I'm going to say, of course, please do it. So for the first question, I think one of the biggest challenges was just recognizing, Barbara mentioned, like recognizing your own privilege. I think, and I completely agree with her, it's hard work, but it's necessary work. So yes, Phyllis mentioned that, you know, continuously being aware of the systemic oppression in our society is a challenge, that sometimes you can get so focused on perhaps a policy or something that you're working towards that you forget that there are intersections. For example, environmental policies to be pushed. Of course, you know, environmental justice, that's an intersection. And sometimes when you get too tunnel visioned, you can forget that those are, of course, linked. For me personally, I said number 3 was pretty hard. Just understanding my ancestry and history and culture. I was adopted. I am, of course, I'm Chinese. And so, you know, I am part of the BIPOC as a Black Indigenous people of color. And as I was saying, it's a little bit, there are nuances within that community as well, of course, where, you know, Asians are called the model minority. So what exactly is my role in the most appropriate sort of, you know, how do I fully support all the different communities, you know, without of course being oppressive myself or things like that. So
May I
that
ask something?
yeah.
Yes.
What type of limitations do you have in your contact with your ancestry?
Limitations, I wouldn't really call them limitations. It's more, me just doing the work.
I think I'd like to keep this with our presenter responding to people.
Yes, oh, yes. Okay, and one thing I was going to add, and I'm so glad that you mentioned these things, Sabine, because what happens is because the way we've been broken out by race and by group actually was created, it was actually a creation by a white belief system. And so what has happened, consequently what's happened is they've lumped all the Asians together, and there's so many diverse Asian. They all have different languages and different cultures and different ways of being, and they're all over the world. You have Filipinos, and they even lumped the Polynesians and the Hawaiians in Asians when they're actually indigenous. So there's, and then also, all these other groups, all the Hispanic is huge. They all have different languages and cultures and different ways of being, but we've been lumped into these huge, huge groups and expected to speak for the entire, universe or something. So it can be quite challenging, but thank you so much, Sabine, for sharing. And so Pamela, would you like to say something? Looks like we had a little interest in you. Would you like to share?
I have to get unmuted.
Yes.
So I met with Larry and I volunteered to be the note taker. And as usually happens with me, is I get very intrigued in the conversation and forget about my note-taking responsibilities. But I do remember that Larry's response to the first question, which would be most challenging personally, was that of number 16, the responsibility of learning and reading more about his role as an effective ally. And so he is a person who has done like lots and lots of research and continues to do a whole lot of research. And in his role is called on to, to really start interfacing with different groups and to actually bring them, as people have been talking about today, to bring them into his organization. So he had some really good insights there. Larry, do you want to say anything?
And how about you, Pamela? Did you have any insights?
Yes. Mine was number 3 and number 4. So I do know about my my ancestral background, and the challenge for me is sitting in that knowledge with confidence and pride. There's no way. I mean, I'm sorry, my ancestors were beyond bad. And then the second part of that was number 4, to be aware of my privileges and to openly discuss them. And I am aware of my privilege kind of on a daily basis. And it continues to be a challenge for me to talk with other people about, even my family members. So, yes.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad you shared that, because that's another issue that everyone grapples with, and especially with members who are a member of the dominant group. And so part of the challenge is being able to fully embrace all of you, right? And then often those that are of mixed ancestry, we have similar challenges, so that we can be proud of all of our ways and all of our ancestry. And it can be a challenge. So I often say, since you have the privilege, a way to be to honor your privilege is to be an ally. To learn not only more about your ancestry, but about other ancestries.
Mm-hmm.
in a way that's being open and not a way to, because I've actually been at circles where some use their privilege to try to target me. So, so thank you so much for sharing your impact. And I didn't know if Larry wanted to join in at all. I didn't want to put him on the spot, but if you're willing to share, please do.
Yeah, thank you, and hello to everybody. I would just do a gentle correction to something that Pam said. Actually, I share with her number 4 as my response to the first question, and I've done some great reading, and I continue to do that. And as I shared with her, my way of dealing with fully understanding the privileges I've enjoyed unknowingly is to build a list, so I can wrap my arms around it better. I understand it at a really macro level, but but before I start stepping out into the broader pool out in the community, I need to be more comfortable with express examples from my life. And I know that I will make mistakes, and that's one of the messages coming through in the reading. Just accept that you're going to make some mistakes, especially when I'm appalled at the history of this country. I'm learning now by self-initiative that I did not get in my K-12 education. It's appalling. Right. It's a crime. So we shared number 4, and I just got to continue to work to get more comfortable in understanding the scope and definition of the privileges that I have enjoyed. So.
Thank you, Larry. And I'm so glad you shared that too, because I want to also let you know that there's a couple of things that we can do together. One is it's good to become comfortable, but it's also good to become uncomfortable. And in fact, when you are uncomfortable, that means you're really learning, and that's good. So I have a long history of being a trained facilitator. I have years and years of experience in that. So I often tend to, and because I am so knowledgeable of my culture and history, and also white dominant culture and history, because that's what we're taught. So I'm knowledgeable about both. And then also the work that I did with NCBI, National Coalition Building Institute, where we did the caucus groups. I've learned about all the groups and all of the issues that they've encountered over the 500 years or so. And so that's really, really good to continue to learn and research, and also know that there's another expression that I learned from a woman who teaches this also in NCBI. She's African and American and Native American. And she says that there's no such thing as being colorblind, number 1. And number 2 is if you want to eliminate race and gender, then we are no longer in the room. So that's a way of erasing us. So her phrase is, your comfort is my oppression. And so we actually encourage people to learn how to be uncomfortable. And then the K through 12, that was very intentional to eliminate our culture and our history, to erase us, because they felt very, very guilty about, the real history. And that's why I do this work. Now, I don't want you to feel guilty, but that's why I do it, is to teach people about the real history. And it looked like we had another person interested in sharing. Was it Alex? Did I see a hand there? If you wanted to share.
Yeah, I will touch on mostly kind of what I identified with, but there did seem to be a little bit of a theme. I also felt that number 3 was my biggest challenge, just as being a white male, the concept of being more familiar with my own ancestral history and having confidence and pride in that seems counterintuitive to all the work that I've been doing. But then after you explained one of the other responsibilities, that actually clarified that portion a little bit more for me. And so I was so focused on looking outside that the idea of looking insight into my own history, I'm slightly familiar with it, but embracing that for what it is, not necessarily pushing it on other people, is something that's new. It's a new perspective for that.
Thank you.
But that's also because it's connected to guilt, which was also mentioned I was with Carolyn and Rebecca, and guilt was something that we talked about, just feeling guilty. And and not letting that be the main driver. Like, we also have a very genuine interest in doing a lot of the work that we're doing, but making sure that guilt is not the main driver or motivator for our actions, and trying to be sustainable, and selecting things that we can carry on in the future and not just in the moment sort of performative actions, if you will.
Yes, thank you. That's so well articulated, and that's exactly you hit the nail right on the head. That's the perfect learning for today. And for time, can we go to number 2? Which do you think you can implement, and give a brief example? Is there anyone who'd like to share? Looked like there was some interest with someone. Anne, did you have anything? I wasn't sure if I saw expression of interest. Or Samara, that's a beautiful name. I don't know if you wanted to share anything, Samara.
Sure. So I have worked with different Indigenous communities in the past, but because of my own ancestry, a lot of the knowledge is more centered on Indigenous communities south of the border. So like Mexico, throughout like what is known as Mexico, or like South America. And so my journey has been the last couple years, like the last year or two, and what I've been focusing on moving forward is really learning the like Indigenous communities here, like learning about their stories, their language, their connection, because I think like my focus has mostly just been across Latin America because of like that connects to my own roots. But I think it's just as important to understand like the Coast Salish people that I'm here on, and like right now I'm unoccupied like Snohomish territory, so like understanding theirs. And even like working with TCAT, which is like in Thurston County, like also understanding like the Indigenous communities there. So I think just structuring more of a place-based knowledge.
Great, thank you so much for sharing. Yes, Roy, did you want to go ahead and share?
Well, I just want to say I was with Chris and Connie. We didn't get to respond to number 1. And I'd like to just simply say that was a hard one for us. We have 4 different ones we could have put in there.
And what were the 4 that you?
Well, the number 4 was 10, 5, 12, 2, and 16. I don't want to repeat them all because I know we are short on time. But I think one of the things for us was that they're all difficult, they're all challenging, and we could not make a choice. For me personally, I think the tension between wanting to be involved to help and finding the groups to want to invite us in and work with us is always a thing. And we've got ancestors who have done this, father and grandfather and so on, with real live experiences. And then on number 2, we really didn't get to it. The number 1 took up more of our time, and then we did do something with 3. We can come back to that.
Great, thank you. And that's so perfectly understandable. I realize we literally could spend a couple hours just doing the Q&A and also the Bill of Responsibilities, and we really appreciate your time and effort in doing this. And it's perfectly okay to address number 1 and number 3 or number 2. That's fine. Anybody else on number 2? Question number 2. Yes, Barb, go ahead.
Okay, one thing we talked about is drawing upon our own experiences where we've been discriminated against because, of our gender or, race. I was discriminated for being white in a newly elected Black student organization, and Phyllis talked about her experiences with gender-related power structure experiences when in the past where women couldn't have birth control unless they were married with the permission of their husband and all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
And so drawing upon those experiences to understand other people's experiences And Sabine talked about recognizing our privilege is a good place to start. Don't act out of guilt and being critically aware. I don't know if Sabine or Phyllis wanted to add to that.
Yeah, she puts a thumbs up. Thank you, Barb. I'm so glad you shared that too, because what happens is not everyone's on the same path, right? And so some people who have been really targeted, especially recently, like I try to explain that the slavery era started over 100 years after the genocide started with our people. So, and that happened during a time where we didn't have televisions, we didn't have Zoom, we didn't have radio, we didn't, you know, have a lot of ways of communicating. So what was happening to us, you know, you couldn't video it on your phone, right? And so this was happening all over the nation very intentionally. And the militias actually were allowed by the government to actually shoot us on sight. And I don't know if you remember the scalp, you know, they got money for the scalps. And if it was a female, you got more money because she would, that meant you prevented some from her having children, etc. And so, and the same thing, or similar, I shouldn't say the same thing, but similar issues have happened with the Black community. I've also experienced that, but it's, we call it bigotry because it's lateral violence, because he doesn't have the, he or she, they don't have the power that the white majority race does. But what happens is because they've been oppressed and that's all they know, they tend to oppress each other and other groups of color. And they might especially do that with white people, but that doesn't mean that they all do it, just like all white people, you know, may not oppress intentionally, right? Because, you know, we all understand everyone here is a good person. And so we realize that everyone's on a different track and some are not quite there yet. And so, and some may not want to get there, as you know, in the environment that we're in now with this particular politicalization of racism and classism and sexism. It's really a difficult time right now. So I thank you so much for sharing your experiences, and I'm sure that's happened to many people as well. And let's move to number 3. Whoever was able to move to number 3, bravo. If any of you were able to address anything in number 3, where do you think you need more information and or training? Yes, Wayne, please speak up.
Wayne, you're muted.
Right. I was recorder for group number 7, and we actually ended up there right off the bat. We couldn't even decide on any of the 1 through 16, but in where we needed information, we realized we needed information about all of it in terms of trying to scope this problem. But we did realize that some of the background of us, and this is a group with Jenny Middlebrooks and Diana Moore, and we each have had experiences in terms of, well, having grandkids and growing up, and what were they exposed in or in school. Realized that we were not exposed to this in school. And I mentioned my mom, same way, she was born and raised in Olympia and was not exposed to any of this in her classes. So, you know, the same way for us that both Jenny and Dinah mentioned in terms of more information for our grandkids, any good books or reading materials or instructional materials for the toddlers. We do appreciate this course has been a tremendous course, and looking at that instructional material that provided that would be certainly some good starts, but we're looking for more information was our final discussion item.
Great, yes. And Roy has your hand up. Go ahead and unmute you.
Well, I'll give a shout out to Doug Mackey, who's here with Learning Right Relations, a local group that has been studying our relations with Indigenous people. And several of us have had experiences of learning just an awful lot with and about indigenous peoples, and it's a personal way of learning, not just a book way of learning. And to me, that's been extremely helpful, and I think we shared that with others in the group.
Thank you,
Great.
Roy. Hi, Ellany. This is Doug. I just wanted to thank Roy and thank you and Lynn for the work to pull this together. This is so important, and in terms of what we need into the future is, more opportunities like this. I did want to share, I was in group 3, and I wanted with Tom and with Ann, and wanted to share that all 3 of us had learnings we can do, are challenged in various levels of ways for number 3 in terms of our ancestral history. We found some of the language, we had to read it several times to make sure which they, the there was, and just the process of untangling that kind of brings you to awareness of, oh, okay, can we ever really not be subjective about this? So thank you for this as a tool. It's a wonderful part of this. Learning right relations is the area where some of us continue to work. The Surge group that Ann is involved with, and TCAT from Tom, each of them provided some examples of work that included work. For instance, Surge had supported the missing and murdered Indigenous women of Washington's raising of funds for a blanket project for them. Learning Right Relations next activity will be next week as people will join Jode Gowdy, and through redthought.org, you can see the 3-part series that'll be done with Stephen Newcomb, who's responsible for the material behind the film that you pointed out earlier, Ellany. And so there'll be 3 weeks of 2 hours each with Jode and Stephen Newcomb starting next week. You can find out about that at redthought.org. Thank you for letting us share.
Thank you. That's really inspiring to hear all the work that you're doing. I know I've really enjoyed the workshop and spending time with you all down at the Learning Right Relationship. That was really a wonderful experience.
I have one other additional announcement that has to do with Learning Right Relations. So Learning Right Relations has invited Carolyn Treadway, who's on this call, and I to give an event on Thursday, October 15th, that'll be for white allies, and it will be kind of looking at taking the work that reconnects from Joanna Macy and figuring out how to apply that to our, among other things, our brief about how Native people have been treated and an effort to reconnect to the earth in general. So if that is something that you're curious about, you could email me or actually Doug and get more.
Or me.
Yes, and Carolyn, could you, it looks like you were about ready to say something too.
Well, I was just saying right here that they could also contact me. And I wanted to say that Joanna Macy's work takes us deep into ourselves for our own grief and anger and whatever, and helps us to transform that into action. So that's the process we'll be going through.
Thank you so much. Looks like we're right at 2:30, and I'm so glad. I've really been honored to be here with you all, and welcome to the new Zoom world. And I hope you found this really helpful, educational, and a good way, a good start to continue. And I know you've been learning, you've been on this learning path for a long time, so I really appreciate it. There's a Tlingit word, Gonishish, that means thank you, and I Gonishish, and thank you, Lynn, and all of you for being here. And it's really been a pleasure working with Lynn these few months to get this coordinated and organized. Thank you so much, Lynn.
I'm very thankful.
Thank you.
I'm very thankful for what you shared with us. And I know that the right way would be, we give you a gift right now, but this is a limitation of Zoom. So, but if anybody wants to unmute, we can at least clap.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Okay.
And, I will be sending out the handout to everybody. So
Good.
Okay.
Please enjoy the rest of the day. We have fresh air and sunshine.
Yeah.
Yay.
Hey.
Bye-bye.
Until we meet again.
Yes.
Thank you.